Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Amy. I am the program lead at Innovate Durban. Thank you for waiting. We obviously, sometimes people have issues joining, so we just want to give everyone an opportunity to get on. We're very excited for today's webinar, which is all around funding for innovators and for startups. Before we get going, I'm just going to go through some house rules. You'll notice that there's no Q&A, no chat function, no raise hand function. That's because we want to drive any engagement through to the Q&A. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. You're able to ask questions throughout the webinar. Questions will be answered right towards the end of the webinar, however, but you can ask questions throughout, and you can upvote other people's questions if they've asked a question you were going to ask. Yeah, so those are really some of the just basic house rules. We will also launch a poll during the Q&A session that we would love to just get everyone's feedback on. It's an anonymous poll. It's very quick, very easy. So we would love to hear from you guys there. With regards to the Q&A, obviously we've got an hour for this session, and hoping the panelists don't speak too long so that we do have time for Q&As. But if we do get a question that's a little bit more in-depth, that will take a bit longer to answer, we may not answer during the webinar, but we will follow up with everyone and answer via email if necessary. We will also share everything that is presented today with all the participants. So now that all of that's out the way, for those of you who don't know, I want to just introduce Innovate Durban. Innovate Durban is a non-profit company based in Durban. We have head offices at the Point Waterfront and an innovation collab, which you would have seen some pictures of right at the beginning, which is based in Cater Manor. And really, our job is to stimulate innovation in Durban and in KZN, and we support innovators and entrepreneurs as well as supporting the kind of development of the innovation ecosystem within KZN. And then just a quick introduction to the Catapult series. This may be the first webinar you're joining. We have had a couple more, and we will be running them for the rest of the year. But the Catapult series is really about bringing together innovators, innovation stakeholders, support organizations, to tackle topics that are relevant to innovators and that will help drive innovation forward and support innovators in kind of their business pursuits. So today's webinar, like I said, is around funding, and we have 3 different panelists all speaking towards funding and about funding, but all from very different kind of aspects or avenues. So I will introduce each panelist as they speak, but I do want to just introduce our first panelist. So our first panelist is Paul Platinga. Paul is a research specialist at the HSRC, but specifically, if you spoke to Paul, he would tell you he doesn't do research. He uses research to inform policy specifically. So Paul at the HSRC and Innovate Durban partnered last year to develop a funding map. And I'm not going to give too much away, but I want to hand over to Paul, who's going to share with us, from his perspective. So thank you so much, Paul.
Thanks, Amy. It's great to be here and great to be back in the kind of innovation space a bit more again. Yeah, as you say, we worked together on a project quite a while back now, and I'm going to share some slides just to give a bit of an overview of what we did. I think I've only got a few minutes, so I'm going to jump straight into it and share my screen. I hope that that's visible.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to run through some slides about what we did, and this is just an adaptation of what we presented earlier in the year. So I manage a program called the Policy Action Network at the HSRC. It's supported by the Department of Science and Innovation. We do a few things, largely around, as you say, synthesizing research, making it more accessible, sourcing data, making data more available and accessible, and helping policy actors as well as civil society and hubs such as Innovate Durban and Innovators use research information and data to make decisions in their day-to-day work. So that's what we do at Policy Action Network. I'm going to be talking about the project that we did with Innovate Durban called the Funding Map, or the Innovation Funding Map. Essentially, there were 3 steps to it. The aim was really to identify potential funding sources, really, and targeted at early stage or emerging innovators. So your typical kind of startup, small enterprise innovators. And what we did essentially was, as a first step on our side, we aggregated research and looked at what the research said about funding and what was happening around South Africa, and developed an initial framework. We then worked with innovators within the Innovate Durban community, where we sourced information on actual funding sources around South Africa primarily, to see which ones could be relevant to emerging innovators. And then we pulled all that information together into what is hopefully a living map of innovation funding sources that emerging innovators can use. So the link is going to be available fairly soon. I think the Innovate Durban team is just migrating it to another source, but I'll give you a quick snapshot of it in a second. So this is just, you don't need to read the details of it, but we developed a framework, and we can share this framework with others. But essentially, we tried to map the wider spectrum of funding and resourcing mechanisms that innovators use. Everything from your more direct funding instruments, such as commercial investment, equity, debt, mezzanine, through your impacts, investments, CSI, funding as well, all the way through to bootstrapping. So we looked at quite a wide spectrum of potential funding sources that innovators might draw on. There's a couple of pictures of the group that worked on the funding map, and those are some of the innovators that we worked with. And this is what really a core of what we produced out of it is a quite large spreadsheet. I think there's about 700 or 600 data points on it of potential funding sources that are available to South Africa-based innovators. So we initially started looking at kind of the eThekwini, Durban, KZN area, but then expanded to South Africa and funding actors that are active in the South Africa space and the broader African space. So we essentially aggregated quite a large number of potential funding sources, and then we added our own kind of largely subjective evaluation of these funding mechanisms. So we evaluated the kind of size of the funding instruments that were available, as well as at what stage in the innovation kind of maturity chain these funding actors were looking to fund in. So anyway, there's a spreadsheet, and this should be a shared Google or other sheets, and it should be online fairly soon for people to have a look at. And then Innovate Durban will continue to work on it, and I think the innovators will continue adding to it. So out of that sheet, we then just generated a Google Data Studio kind of graphic out of it. So there's 2 main axes to it. It's fairly straightforward. On the left, we defined the size of the funding instruments that were available. So everything from your micro kind of investments of, say, 10,000 Rand, all the way through to the larger investments at the top end of the spectrum. That's your private equity type funding. And then on the x-axis is where these funding actors were typically playing. So from very early stage innovations, so your prototypes and ideas, all the way through to kind of mature growth oriented innovations and innovators. So and happen to have, I think Kingston is on this call, so that's a coincidence. Then this is kind of a high-level analysis we just pulled from it. It's not rigorous in any way, but it's a picture that we developed from looking at the data points that came through. And for us, it was fairly interesting, and I suppose it's open to debate, but the way we saw it is that there's roughly 5 clusters of funding in the kind of South African innovation funding space. There's what we called impact investments, which span quite a wide maturity of innovation, all the way from your very early stage social entrepreneur innovators to the slightly larger ones. Then there's more of the CSI and social funding instruments. So corporate social investments, which generally doesn't play in the innovation space, but there's potentially some funding there that innovators can tap into. Then there's your kind of, and I suppose it's the one that often gets the most attention, but it's probably one of the less accessible ones, is your kind of traditional venture capital type funders sitting in the middle. And then on the other end of this, at the top end of the spectrum, is more your growth private equity, as well as a lot of government and public sector competitiveness incentives at the top end. And then the last one to highlight, which I think is an underexplored area or a kind of quite low-key area, is more your RFP, RFQs, gig economy type area, where an innovator, such as for example, software developer, is doing on-demand work for customers, and in that way they are innovating and sourcing funding. And I think that's especially a space that I think a lot of people are trying to highlight, is that innovators need to work more in that space, I think. And then to look at migrating into some of these other instruments over time, rather than getting caught in a seeking funding repetitively, which I'll get to later, just as a summary. So that's really how we clustered them. Just want to check where my slides are. So then this is what I was starting to touch on, and I think this is, I suppose, the one thing I wanted to highlight is that there seemed, for me, and looking at the clusters that were there, there's really 2 main pathways for innovators. The one is that they, as I was saying, they tend to get trapped. I don't know if people can see my mouse, but they tend to get trapped in that impact investment, very early stage kind of impact investment space, where they're getting grant funding, and then they're just jumping from grant funding to grant funding source, or incubator to incubator, and then they're incubated and by kind of 4 or 5 different incubators, and getting grant funding through those incubators, but not really moving forward. So they get kind of trapped in a cycle. Although some of them exit into this kind of early stage VC space, in say that, the 10 to 15 million rand investment space. So those are the success stories, but often people are getting stuck in that cycle there. The more interesting routes, in my view, is the ones that work in this RFP, RFQ, gig type space, that then can either look to migrate into more of the kind of innovation funding instruments, or they do that whilst they are getting impact investments. So they're sourcing grant funding at the same time as doing those kind of customer-oriented innovation projects. So a combination of the 2 is probably most interesting. And then just the last slide to finish off on, we also, as part of that, just pulled up a lot of the enablers that are connecting people with funding. So on the bottom left end of the spectrum is more the tech incubators and enterprise development programs. And then at the higher end of the spectrum is more the accelerators, as they're called, and the supply development programs, which are providing support that is sometimes innovation oriented. And then lastly is more your market matching platforms that are connecting innovators with customers, for example. And I think that's it from me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. Yeah, that was such an exciting project. And obviously, in saying that, that sounds like the project's over. There's still work, as the nature of funding is, to be done to constantly update that. We did have one question that came through, which I'm going to break the rules and answer now, which was just around whether people are able to access that list of funding sources. The answer to that is yes. It will be accessible via the Innovate Durban website shortly. We will also be developing that content into kind of a living dashboard. So not only can innovators access kind of the list of where there's potential funding opportunities, but support organizations and those looking to fund innovators can also have a broader understanding of where innovation funding exists already, and maybe whether there's kind of any niche opportunities or areas as well. So thank you so much for that, Paul. I'm going to introduce our next panelist, and our next panelist, who similar to Paul, has a long-standing relationship with Innovate Durban. NK is the director and founder of an organization called PISTA, which, although I say has a long-standing relationship with Innovate Durban, only found out today what PISTA actually stands for, which is Progress in Science, Technology and Arts. So I said to NK, I do like an organization that's named very intelligently and speaks to what it does. So I'm very excited to hear from NK. NK is, like I mentioned earlier, we're trying to give kind of various perspectives to this kind of topic of funding. So NK is coming from the angle of I need funding. How do I access that? So we're very excited to hear from you, NK. I'm going to hand over to you.
Cool. Thank you so much. And sure, welcome to everyone else. So just jumping straight into it, I am going to share my screen. There we go. So essentially, we're going to be talking about these 10 points. So looking at another look at the landscape that Paul sort of pointed out, looking at actual social media and how to organize it, looking at the validation, so understanding how a press release can sort of create a launch pad, looking at actually getting the validation aspect, and surprisingly going to look at LinkedIn, so focusing on how LinkedIn can sort of assist a startup in the space, personalizing, looking at the black book, looking at a snapshot of what I did during July. And number 9 is a very interesting one. So court your VC, so looking at prospect and an update later. And last but not least, the pitch deck that I'm going to be sending to Ross. So first things first, I think just a quick overview. I think I found this slide incredibly interesting, and this one was the sort of funding instruments and the various funding instruments. And as Paul said, that I mean, I think all of these instruments serve a startup at a different time in a space. And also just another key point to highlight was the idea that you can use a blend or a phased approach. And I think the ultimate goal for any startup is staying alive. And that's just oxygen, just being able to breathe, being able to sort of chug along and move on to the next day. I think the last point also makes that's worthwhile. And this one, I think, is also one that I find quite attractive, is the idea of the RFPs, the RFQs, and sort of those gigs, right? So, and also the understanding that these are unrelated to potentially the startup, but are sort of short cash generating sort of activities. So second slide, how to manage your content. Now, I think social media is a very powerful tool, which is somewhat sometimes used incorrectly. And I mean, the most compelling one for me right now is Twitter. And Twitter has a very neat tool, and that tool is the ability to create lists. So oftentimes we go in and we follow 1,000 people, and we sort of get, and those voices sort of get lost in the noise of a Twitter. And so what I'd advise any startup to do is to go and create lists. So on mine, you could see current affairs, accounts that I follow on design, disruptors, the marine sort of space, and the maritime space, which is something I'm more frequently interested in of late. Cool, so here it is, right? So a bit of validation. So what do we do when you're sitting there and you have this brilliant idea, right? And you sort of want to get your name out there. I first start off with a bit of validation, right? And what it is hype, actually. So what you see on your screen are essentially two sort of newspaper articles that are featuring on the Berea Mail right now. And so you can go on there and you can search the headlines and you'll find them there. Now, what's interesting to find out is that they were not there by mistake. So what I did essentially was actually draft the press release and the press note and send it through to the journalists, and they then decided whether or not it was newsworthy or not, right? And then they sort of profiled and they did the actual press release, and that was phenomenal. Now, that's great and all right, but I mean, then the validation is needed. And so what most startups do is that they focus on the product and the service and not necessarily themselves. And this is also an opportunity where that validation, so that hype, actually needs some credentials. And what this means is fundamentally going online and developing yourself as an entrepreneur so that you can sort of create a compelling value proposition to your own startup. And what I did during the lockdown period was take on a lot of online courses, right? So this looks at product management all the way through to automation with Python, fundamentals of digital marketing, innovation management. More interestingly, actually went into the data science roots, so moved on from methodology all the way through to Python, SQL, and moved on to the entire Google ecosystem, right? And so what this does is that I think it's very attractive for someone that would either go through your LinkedIn profile to sort of catch a glimpse of what it is that you're trying to do and the direction that it is that you're going through. And all of these credentials are essentially on LinkedIn. Now, what do we do when you are an enterprise that is not networked, that doesn't know people in the space, that doesn't necessarily have a big network? Again, I think LinkedIn is a fundamental, ultimate tool for any startup right now. So typically what you would do is type in the company name that you would want there, and it would give you that it has 67,000 employees. Now, what you would do then is essentially go on to people, click in there, and understand where they stay and where they live and where they study. Now, this insight actually helps you in crafting your entrance strategy towards approaching them and sort of how to court them. And what the next move would for me would be is essentially then to say personalize everything. So now that I've seen all of these people and I've really identified the person that I want to start a conversation with, I'd really craft a small message and I'd make it a point to personalize the message and not just want to connect them. So I would write something like, "Dear Ross, I got featured recently and thought you would find this interesting. So remember in the beginning when I wrote that news article and sent it to the Berea Mail, I simply dropped that link in there so that the person can click on the link and can sort of say, hey, this person's validated in somewhat way. And then I carry on with the message. I've spotted a unique opportunity in agriculture that my startup is well positioned to exploit and give you access in the process. See link to our deck. I'd love a 10-minute chat with you to explain our proposition." Now, what I do with this message is that I put it in there and essentially send it through to the person. And I would do this with every other person in the organization. Create your own black book. Now that I've essentially done all of that, right, my next step would be to say, of the people that I've gone through on LinkedIn, these are all the interesting people that I think that I can start a conversation with. And what I do is that I keep track of all the conversations that I have with people. So if you remember all the funding instruments that we spoke about, what you'll realize is that now I've created sort of tabs. So I've mapped out the procurement ecosystem. I've mapped out all the ESD players in the space. I've mapped out all the VC firms in a particular industry. I've gone so far as to map out all the different companies that are particularly ones of interest to me and sort of the roles of the people that I want to be speaking to. So I'd look at your chief financial officers, your enterprise development managers, your head of sourcing, for example. I'd look at supply chains. I'd look at buyers. I'd look at contract managers, your logistics managers, and your supply chains. And this process is as tedious as it might seem. It becomes very important because it gives you a full view of the organization, the various people that are involved in there, and also the various aspects and the different types of value chains that are involved. So this is a screenshot of my activity in July. So one thing's for certain is that I noted a very weird trend in that because I was spending a lot of time on LinkedIn, I had multiple conversations with various people on the one side, right? So these are anything from your procurement buyers to your VCs, etc. And this was confirmed by the battery usage on my mobile device, right? So you can sort of see that I spent a third of my time on LinkedIn as a tool. So much so that you get to a point where you essentially run out of invitations that you can send to the various people. Now, what becomes interesting is that during lockdown period, especially, is that people spent a lot of time on LinkedIn as a space to sort of connect with new opportunities. And so what you see, the number 4 here, is that there was actually a shift away from my emails to now my messages or instant messages on a LinkedIn platform. And this can be further confirmed by the idea that there was a 258% increase on my activity on LinkedIn and creating those connections. Now, that's all great. And now that you've connected with the people that you've essentially wanted to connect with, and more so the VC and the potential investor that you've sort of come out, this is a template that you'd want to send out at this stage, which is a prospect letter, right? Which is then to say, good day, I'm directed XYZ. I'm writing with a simple ask, right? I would like to send you updates on where we are as a startup every single month and what our intention is. Now, the reason we're doing this is because we essentially want to raise money, and we don't want to raise money now, but we project that we'd like to raise money in future, and we'd like you to be part of the journey and understanding what it is that we're doing and where it is that we're going. And by way of background, we're doing this again. Would you please let me know if you have any objections to us sending you this update? So this then becomes a letter that you send out to VCs long before we need the actual runway or need the money. Now, what the monthly letter that would then send out would be a hi Ross. It's been a great quarter since our last update. Our focus has been on this one thing. By way of reminder, XYZ company is doing ABCDE. And what we then do here is highlight sort of the key wins that we've done. So insert the milestones that we've done. This month, we're focusing on that. Our goal is this. This is how we measure ourselves. Looking ahead, this is what we intend to do in the sort of sector. This is the team shot, and insert an image of yourself. And again, at this stage, this is why it's important to take on all those online courses, because it lends some validity and some credential to the work that we're doing. And last but not least, the pitch deck, right? So all of the work now suddenly adds up to this single document here. The single document just highlights the company purpose, the problem, the solution, and the market size, and more so the product that you're highlighting. And with that said, I'm done.
Sure. Thank you so much, Enke. You are a formidable SMME, essentially. Yeah, I would be nervous to be in Ross's position or to be a VC, just because I'm convinced and you actually haven't showed me anything yet. But yeah, I think that's incredibly beneficial for innovators to understand. So often as Innovate Durban, we see incredible ideas and incredible innovations, and they never land up making it to the next step because all of this background kind of work and yeah, what often is kind of pushed to the side because it's not necessarily the focus of the innovation is kind of often lost. So incredibly valuable, and I think yeah, I think everybody's going to be wanting a chat with you, never mind a chat with Ross. So that brings us to our last panelist for today, and our last panelist is Ross. He's a partner at Kingston Capital, and Kingston Capital is a local Durban VC, and so we've brought Ross on board to kind of give the Kingston perspective of you know, from an actual VC, what is the process? When you do need funding, what are you going to have to go through to actually, at the end of that day, secure that funding. So thank you so much for being willing to share with us, Ross. You all should be able to see that on your screen now. Thank you so much.
Super, thanks, Amy. Just want to validate my fellow panelists. Paul, the work that you've done on putting that spreadsheet together on all the funding opportunities and options that are out there, both locally and nationally, is worth as much as gold in a global pandemic. I mean, it really is. It's a phenomenal piece of work. I never ever sit on a public platform without someone asking me, I've got an early stage startup, where do I find funding? They're too early for us as a VC, but you're always trying to find out other options for people to help them out. So that's well done, brilliant. And NK, I feel like I've been stalked, but in a good way. Brilliant presentation. Honestly, guys, I would like to just give a double thumbs up on NK's presentation. There is so much valuable stuff in there. And the strategic nature of the way he goes about seeking funding is what impressed me most about that presentation. Just the thinking, the logic, right down to upskilling during lockdown. I just want to give validation to that, because it's important to know from my side, looking at it as a VC, that's high quality, and there's some good stuff in there. I just want to, before just jumping in, about the process, and that's what the one slide is actually on about, the process that Kingston Capital follows for due diligence. Just before that, I just want to start by saying venture capital funding is not for everyone. I think that's important to understand. Just a few things about venture capital funding. We buy some of your company, so it's not a loan. We buy equity in the company. Inevitably, we come with structures that you might or might not like. So reporting financials on a monthly basis, board meetings, or answering to a board. And one thing I've learned in a few years of in 4 years of being in venture capital is that a lot of entrepreneurs generally don't like answering to other people. They like to be their own boss. So that might not be something that works for you. And you can also incur legal costs in raising a funding round as a startup. So just wanted to put it out there that venture capital funding isn't necessarily the goal. It shouldn't be the goal for everybody. It is an important piece of the puzzle in the funding matrix, but it's not necessarily the be all and end all for everybody. Just a couple of quick comments which tie in with other comments made by the other panelists. To find venture capitalists, look up their websites. You'll find a lot of them on the SARS website, and also many of them are members of SAVCA, the South African Venture Capital and Private Equity Association. You can find our websites on those websites. That tool that now Paul is putting out, they'll all be there. So that's going to be on the Innovate Durban website soon. How else do you find venture capitalists? Try and get to investor events. I know the events industry is under pressure at the moment, so that's not that easy. It's a lot more virtual events like this, but try and get to them. Try and get in front of people. Introduce yourself. Meet them at these investor events if you can get there. Other options, and Paul spoke about them earlier, accelerators, incubators, those kind of programs are out there. I find it was interesting to me, the reference to, some startups get stuck in that kind of incubator cycle and never kind of get out of it. The key difference between those two, it's not the only difference, because the venture capital industry is still quite small in South Africa. But the key difference is usually market traction. So we look for market traction. We look for companies that have actually started to gain market share or gain clients. They're actually gaining revenue. And what you often find is great ideas. There's lots of good ideas out there, but not well executed, or it's a great idea, but the clients don't actually want it. It looks like a great idea on paper, but actually it's not gaining any form of traction with the customer base. So that's what you'll often find. The other thing, and the last way to kind of get in front of VCs, if you know people in the investment industry, try to get a warm introduction. That's quite a common way we find we receive pitch decks. People, friends of friends, or people that we know, introduce someone that they know, and so that is another way. Just very, very quickly, Kingston is it's 5 years old. As Amy mentioned earlier, it's based in Durban. We have offices up in Hillcrest. We have we're at the tail end of our Fund 1 that is closed. We launched that 4 years ago. Fund 2 launched last year. We're still raising money for Fund 2, but it's a $100 million fund. We haven't actually raised all the money for that at this point in time, but that is what we're aiming to raise. And within that fund, we do quite a vast array of maturity of companies that we invest into. So we have investments as small as $50,000, which is give or take 850,000 Rand, up to sort of a $2 million investments. Those are for much maturer startups that are scaling fast and doing incredible things. Right, so let's just take you through very quickly what happens when we receive the pitch deck. So I loved NK's presentation. So teed it up perfectly to say, here we go. This is what it's all about. I've now got it. Here's my pitch deck. I send it through. I love the little teaser email he sent through as well. Kind of here's what we're doing, and here's the access to our pitch deck. Short, punchy, comes through. Our website gets inundated. We receive a lot of pitch decks on the website. Through the website, we also receive direct emails, as I said, people introducing from friends of friends and that kind of thing, and other introductions that we from places that we know and organizations that we engage with, Innovate Durban or incubators, accelerators that we work with and partner. So we get a large flow of information that comes through. We channel everything, even if it comes to me. So I'm one of the partners. There are 3 of us. Even if it comes to me, it always goes through an investment principle. So our process is that we've got one person who in the organization sees all the pitch decks coming through, and she's able to then filter that information so that we then are, once it hits the partners, it's already gone through a filtering process. So what that investment principle will do is kind of see if the startup is within our mandate. Is it a South African base? So yeah, let me give you an indication of what Kingston invests in. Now, again, this is our process. It's not necessarily all VCs, but a number of them would follow a fairly similar process. So what exactly do we look for? It's got to be a South African-based startup. At this point, we are looking at investing in African startups. We will partner with venture capital firms sitting in other parts of Africa in time within Fund 2. But right now, we're getting our home base right. So South African startups, we look for technology-enabled companies. So it doesn't have to be a hard, heavy tech company, but where technology is actually enabling the business to grow. We look for scaling businesses. We look for businesses that can grow and grow fast. Inevitably, technology-enabled businesses allow them to grow fast. So the reciprocal of that is really a lifestyle type business. So if you go and you want to buy a Steers franchise, for example, or a service station, a petrol station, that you can make a really decent living out of that. Don't get me wrong at all. Someone can spend their whole career as a business person operating those kind of businesses. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not what we invest into. We're looking for businesses that are going to inevitably disrupt existing industries or growing a brand new industry and can scale hugely, can move into other parts of Africa and essentially the world. We also look for a founding team. We have got exceptions to this, but generally one founder, if it's only one, usually only comes with a certain number of skills. Generally there should be 2 and sometimes more founders involved, because then the more people involved, the more skills. As I said, there are exceptions. We did make investments in Fund 1 that only had one founder, so that's not a deal killer for us, but it is something we do look for. And then I spoke about product market fit earlier, so market traction, where the product that one is selling or the service has actually started to gain customers. We are a post-revenue investment business. I think that's important to understand. If you've got a great idea, if you've got a great a prototype or something that you're working on, it needs to be in another space of funding. So whether it's an incubator or whether it's your own money, bootstrapping, or what is affectionately in the industry called triple F money, family, friends, and fools. But no, that is a joke. But just so the other investors that are pre-venture capital, if it's pre-revenue, we're not in the pre-revenue game. Okay, and then one other thing we look for, and it's just a funny little internal mantra, we look for obsession. on the business, because you can fake passion, but you can't fake obsession. And we've come across some very many obsessed startup founders, which are great, and they're great to deal with, because they will drive the thing until they don't have breath left in their lungs, and that's what you need as a partner. So those are the kind of things that we're looking for from from startups. I've only got a few minutes left. The process then goes like this. Oh, and sorry, very importantly, what NK did, he said, I'm going to start talking to startups long before I need money. Brilliant idea. I tell guys who I engage with, if I engage with a brand new startup today, I'll tell them, 5 to 6 months before we would, if you're going to make it through our process, 5 to 6 months before we're going to disperse funds. That's critical. So people who come when they desperately need money for next month's payroll, we just say, look, it's too late. Our process is going to take too long. So the investment principal then filters all of the startup pitch decks based on the mandate. Every 2 weeks we have a pipeline meeting where the partners and all the team members actually get together, and we filter that some more. Out of that, then a partner is assigned to the startups that have made it through that process. That partner starts engaging with the startup and getting a lot more information. There are startups that fall off at that process. When a partner says, yeah, we were interested from the pipeline meeting, but actually this, and this are the reasons why we wouldn't want to invest, and it falls off. The ones that make it through there, a second partner is then roped into the process, so that we don't have one partner who gets totally their head totally full of this startup, and they miss some obvious things. If it makes it through there, we then look at it's a high level due diligence. We're checking on various matters within the business. And if the two partners are comfortable with that, we will actually then take it to an investment committee meeting. So we put a proposal forward as to why we should invest in this business. And at the IC, we thrash it out, both whether or not we should invest, and also how much we should invest, and what kind of terms of the main structure of the deal, what investment, what valuation being important. And it emerges from that IC process with us saying, okay, we want to do a deal. We would then look at signing a non-binding term sheet with the entrepreneur or the founders. Ultimately, that's quite a step from our side. We have yet to have a non-binding term sheet not turn into a binding legal document. So you're pretty much almost there if you get there. All that is the difference between that is there's an expression of interest. We're keen to delve deeper. It's only if we find an atomic bomb within the kind of due diligence process from there. Something, they said they had a big contract with MTN, and actually, MTN hasn't written a single deal out of that, and they were basing huge forecasts. If we find something where there's been lying or misrepresentation, clearly that would kill off the deal at that point. But we just delve into documentation and make sure we tick all the boxes and check our, dot the I's and cross the T's kind of thing. Thereafter, we hand it over to legal. Legal then take the term sheet, which was non-binding, turn it into legal documents, which expand on all the terms and add all the legal jargon that many people yawn to read, but it is what it is. And then thereafter we make an investment. So that's the process that we follow. It is we look for soft issues as well in founders. It is it's an important thing. We view investments. It's a partnership. It is a partnership. We look to invest for 5 to 7 years in a business. And that's longer than many marriages actually last. So as sad as that statistic is, it's true. And so we've got to trust each other. We've got to be able to work together. So we do also, by bringing the second partner in, it helps us also to look at some of the things like soft issues. I think I've spoken enough, taken up more than enough time, but just wanted to give quite a full picture of everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ross. Very insightful, and I'm hoping very beneficial for a lot of our innovators who are on the webinar, as well as those watching live on Facebook. Hoping that you are inundated, or your principal is inundated and she has to go through a lot of different pitch decks. So thank you so much for sharing that. We're very excited. Like you said, the VC kind of environment in South Africa is quite small still. Durban even more so. So we're very excited to have a VC doing good work based in Durban. I think it will mean a lot for the Durban ecosystem, especially. So we do have just over 10 minutes left on our webinar. We do have a couple of questions, some which I'm happy to answer, some which I'm going to ask some of our panelists to answer. So for just the first question, it's addressed to Paul. So I'm going to ask Paul to answer, but after Paul's spoken, if Russell or Inke have anything to add. So someone asks, sorry, it's an anonymous question, but how has COVID affected funding for innovators or for innovation?
Honestly, although we're a research organization, I don't think, well, I haven't personally, and my colleagues probably haven't been tracking it in that much detail. But I suppose, anecdotally, if I can be a politician and answer that more broadly, I think COVID is probably not, I wouldn't say it's affected there's some macroeconomic issues probably at play, which can affect especially the public sector funding pipeline. So potentially, there's less money in the system going forward, especially out of government. So all of your public tier, CEDA, etc., might be a little bit more constrained. So, but I think that maybe if I can also indirectly answer another question, I think with COVID, I think it's all about opportunities and identifying needs ultimately. And with COVID, it generates new needs and new opportunities. So for funders ultimately, and I think that's where maybe the biggest shifts are around funding in the country, is that my feeling is that there's a bit of kind of would be some kind of tech startup fatigue, and that there's more interest in kind of post-revenue, even at a micro scale, startups that are not necessarily high tech. They're using technology, as Ross is saying, but they are, sorry, I just had a pop-up of the question. Okay, so they're looking for some post-revenue startups that are using technology rather than tech-focused, and that you can get a little bit more, you can see a bit more traction, and I would say money, funds can go into those going forward, especially if the funds in the system are reduced. So I'd look at it from that perspective more than just saying what the immediate COVID issue is for now.
It's a valuable answer. Ross, I don't know if you've got anything to add there.
Yeah, I'd love to chip in there. So, I mean, we've invested in an online grocery shopping business, which, I mean, is literally more than quadrupled. It's about 6 times its volume from beginning of lockdown to now. So there are opportunities within the COVID world, or the world that we live in, which is affected by this pandemic. So there is that. But just to answer the question more relevantly, I think it has had an impact. So you have what's called corporate venture capital businesses, or corporate venture capital, which are big companies that have innovation type hubs or divisions that are looking at investing directly into corporate into tech companies and startups. Some of them are just looking for survival right now, that's just kind of off the table for a while. That's a nice to have. Suddenly it fits in that category. We also have businesses in our funds where they have contracts with or big contracts that are going to basically monetize their business models sitting with corporates right now, which have been delayed and deferred. And so those are sitting in our fund. What about those that are outside the fund that we're looking at? And then you say, well, guys, we know that you think this is going to come within 3 months. That revenue stream's probably 6-9 months away, whatever it happens to be. So there definitely impacts, other than, of course, what Paul said, the macroeconomic effects as well.
Awesome, thanks. Inke, I'm not sure if you've got anything more to add. Cool.
No.
And so just one, there are a lot of questions, but another question from Bronson. and I'm happy to answer this, but anyone can chip in if they'd like. So his question is around the definition used for an innovator. Is it someone coming with a new invention, or does the bringing together of existing offerings under one roof count as innovation? So I don't want to be bold to say that I've got the definition of innovation. It's a difficult thing to define, and different people define it differently. For us at Innovate Durban, very, very broadly, we would define an innovation as a new or much improved product or service offering. So it may not be something that's never been seen before. It may be that you've taken a food delivery service, for example, and added some type of element that just separates it from kind of the rest of the market that are doing, or the rest of the kind of people doing the same thing. So a new or much improved product or service offering. Again, that's a very broad answer, and different people would define it differently. I'm not sure if anyone has anything else, any wisdom around the definition of innovation. Yeah. So another question is just around from Ntutuko. He says, innovators are struggling with funding turnaround times. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, a perception by many funders, including government, was created that adjudication and some red tape will be lifted to speed up the process. What are typical funding timelines for VCs, government, and other lenders? So I think Paul and Ross, in your previous answer, did answer a bit around kind of the timelines, particularly for VCs. I know that, like you said, and like NK said, you need to be starting that conversation a lot sooner than when you need the money, because of that. And another thing, like we can see with a lot of these emergency PPE tenders, that when we start the process of trying to get funding out quicker, and not going through all of the due diligence, we land up kind of causing issues and funding things we shouldn't fund. So I semi-answered that. I'm not sure if anybody else has anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think I'd like to go for it, NK. You go for it.
Cool. So I'd say have multiple fires burning. I think, and this is the first sort of slide that Paul shared, right? So from the ESD spend to the CSI to the RFP, RFQ, I think have touch points in multiple funding streams. I think that will sort of be the lifeline. The mandate is to have oxygen, just breathe.
Perfect. Yeah, I agree with that. I think I was just going to say that there's one thing I've learned in this in 5 years in this industry, and that is that everything takes longer than you think it will. Everything. So whether that's funding, or whether it's the corporate contract that you've just signed up, or the government contract which you think you've just signed up, even if it's signed, sealed, dusted, just getting your actual cash flow out of that. So I've seen more models and more financial models forecasting wonderful returns than you'll ever imagine, but inevitably you always have to say to the founder, it is going to take longer to generate that revenue than you think, and the costs will always be there, or pretty much always be there. So it's just that be patient. Things take a long time, and that's not just a South African issue. You would get that advice from a US VC as well. Things take time. Corporates, although they're faster than government, are still pretty slow. We're a small team and we're quite nimble, and you can get to the decision makers quickly. We still will take 5 months because we're managing other people's money. Remember that. We as venture capitalists have some of our own money in our fund, but it's a small percentage of the overall amount of money. Most of it is other people's money. So we take that very, very seriously. So things just take time.
Yeah,
Awesome.
if I could just add, our experience, especially in the public space, was kind of 12 plus months on any substantial amounts of funding. But as a slightly broader answer, what we were seeing is that from a relatively early stage idea, it was taking about 5 years to get to something or say 3 to 4 years before, probably 5 before you were getting to kind of a $1 million, $1.5 million investment, and then another 2 or 3 years, assuming you were revenue generating or showing some traction or something, to get to a 5 to 10 million kind of pre-seed investment. So the timelines are, as you say, much longer than anyone usually expects, and that's why you need that oxygen. You have to get that contract income somehow for those 5+ years before you start engaging kind of these more substantial kind of seed VC type investors, if you're going that route.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul, for that. We've got time for one more question, but before we do that, apologies, I forgot to mention earlier that Nosipho has launched the poll. So you should all see that on your screen. If you are able just to answer those questions for us, it is anonymous, but we would just like kind of some feedback on that. So the last question comes from Zuko. They want to know if we're aware of any startups that are tackling issues creatively in rural areas or places that are outside the major city centers. So from my side, just one that comes to mind is a organization or a startup called AgriCool. And AgriCool are working in agriculture and have come up with an innovative kind of investment or funding tool to invest directly in rural kind of small scale farmers, and are doing incredibly well from what we've seen. So that's one. I'm not sure if anyone else has come across any other startups or innovators doing something awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah,
Go for it, Ross. Go for it, Ross. It's your turn now.
There's plenty. I mean, anything in the ag tech space. I mean, if you can just say that, you know, agriculture is outside of the city. So anything that's improving the productivity and efficiency of farms, are improving the lives of people who are in that, you know, who are supported by that farm. There are, I mean, with the advent of the internet, you know, we've got we've invested in Fund One in a business which is trying to match SME businesses looking for funding with funders who fund them. That can be anybody from anywhere in the country, because as long as you've got internet connection. So the internet connection thing is a different story. You know, are we rolling out bandwidth across the country? But no, there's plenty of things that can be done in outside of the cities. Startups don't just focus on problems in the cities.
Inge?
So yeah, a quick one would just be, look at the Sustainable Development Goals, right? So look at number 1 to 17. And if you really study those SDGs, you'll fundamentally find that every single one of them have some projects within a rural demographic.
100%. That leads me on just before we close off to mention our Youth Innovation Challenge, which has opened for applications, which you can find on our website, and which is tackling this year challenges around smart city, various aspects of that, but which are, as you said, Enke, linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. And although they're linked to smart city, there's a lot of opportunities for innovators based in rural areas and in townships or informal settlements as well, to speak to challenges directly kind of faced by their communities. So that's just a kind of a side note on our Youth Innovation Challenge. Russ, NK, Paul, I want to say thank you so much for giving your time to us as Innovate Durban and to Durban innovators and startups. I think this last hour really has been invaluable. I think, yeah, from every aspect, there's been a lot of great content, and yeah, we're very grateful for that. To the participants, thank you so much for joining us. We hope, like I feel, it's been a really valuable use of your time for this last hour. If there were any questions we didn't answer, if you have more questions, you're welcome to email us at info@innovate.durban. We would love to hear from you, info@innovate.durban. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good rest of your day, a good long weekend, and to all the women, a great Women's Day. Thank you.